Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Rails to Trails Conservancy. My name is Isabel Lord. I'm the advocacy coordinator here at RTC. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to go through some quick housekeeping. First, attendees have been automatically muted as they join to keep background noise at a minimum. You will not be able to speak during today's webinar. We'll be keeping an eye out for any tech issues that may emerge on our end, but we will be unable to help you with individual tech problems. If you experience any such problem, your best course of action is to contact Zoom's free customer service support directly. If you lose webinar connection, please re-click your login link. You will be able to rejoin the ongoing session at any time. Also, if you have internet connection problems, you can use your phone to dial into the meeting and you will be able to listen. We are recording this webinar, so worst case scenario, you'll be able to view it later. We'll save some time for questions at the end. If you have any questions about our resources or other content, you'll hear about it in the presentation. Please type them in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen at any time. After today's webinar, you'll receive a follow-up email with a survey asking you to rate today's webinar along with a link to the webinar recording. It will include information about RTC's policy work with a link to sign up for occasional email notices from us. With that, I will hand it over to RTC's Vice President of Policy, Kevin Mills.
Thanks, Isabel. So welcome, everyone. My name is Kevin Mills. I'm the Vice President of Policy at Rails Trails Conservancy. Our topic today is RAISE grants, how to make your application competitive. We're pleased that you've joined us because the U.S. Department of Transportation is now soliciting applications for another round of RAISE grants with more money on the table than ever before. And Trail and Active Transportation Networks and Complete Streets have been highly successful through the previous two rounds of RAISE grants over the last year and a half. So this is a really rich opportunity for our movement. Please note that the program that's now called RAISE by the Biden administration, which stands for Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity, previously was named TIGER at the time it was created during the Obama years, and it was renamed BUILD by the Trump administration. But each of those put their own stamp on it, but all three names or acronyms refer to the same program over time. So with me today are Todd Scott, the Executive Director at Detroit Greenways Coalition, and Janet Attarian, Senior Mobility Strategist at SmithGroup, tell the story of how Detroit, Michigan has accessed RAISE, as well as Nia Rodgers, who's the Bicycle and Pedestrian Project Manager at McAdams Civil Engineering Firm, and Dale McKeel, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator at the Durham-Chapel Hill-Carrboro Metropolitan Planning Organization, to represent the same for Durham, North Carolina. And these two cities have built remarkable political will to quickly advance their trail and active transportation networks as high priority solutions to critical social issues such as equitable mobility, economic vitality, neighborhood connectivity, and the environment. Detroit and Durham have successfully competed for RAISE grants from USDOT in large part because they've elevated their walking and biking facilities as essential community assets. So today we're going to learn why and how that happened. So do feel free to drop questions or comments in the Q&A for discussion at the end. And with that, I'll start with our first question for all four of our panelists. And we'll start with Dale. And what I want you to do is basically briefly introduce yourselves and explain your role in advancing trails, walking, and biking in your community. Dale.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Dale McKeel with the Durham-Chapel Hill-Carrboro MPO in the city of Durham. And I've been in that role for about the last 16 years as a bicycle and pedestrian planner. And my work has primarily been around long-range planning for improving active transportation in our community, doing special studies such as a master plan for the Durham Beltline project that we're here to talk about this afternoon, and also securing funding for these projects. And over the course of my time in Durham, I've had the pleasure of commuting to work by bicycle on a rail trail, the American Tobacco Trail.
Great, thanks. And Nia, next.
Hi, so like Dale, I also reside in Durham, North Carolina. And prior to my work at McAdams, I also worked for the city of Durham as a construction project manager, mostly delivering park and transportation projects. And one of those was the Durham Rail Trail, which I now support as a manager at McAdams. And in my spare time, when I'm not doing my work, which is primarily bike ped, urban design focused, I am usually hiking and leading groups with a couple of different organizations that focus on minorities in the Durham area.
Great, thank you. Janet, could you go next?
Hi, everyone. I'm Janet Attarian. I am a principal out of our Detroit office of SmithGroup. I am also our lead mobility strategist, and I help lead our national mobility practice. Before that, however, I was the deputy director of planning for the city of Detroit. And before that, I was the complete streets director for the city of Chicago DOT. And through all of those jobs, I have had the great pleasure to be really involved with trail projects and, quite frankly, a lot of rails to trail projects. But the one I think we're going to talk about the most today is what is now called the Joe Louis Greenway, although when we started it was called the Inner Circle Greenway. And that's a project that I've had the pleasure to be involved with, both from the city side and now on the consultant side.
Great. And Todd.
Yeah, Todd Scott. I am the executive director for the Detroit Greenways Coalition. So we're a nonprofit in Detroit that's advocating for better biking and walking trails, complete streets, more safety, and so on. So, and I want to give a little background that 15 years ago when our group started, the city of Detroit was in a very different place. They were financially, on the brink of bankruptcy, literally, and not thinking about trails. And so a lot of our members, nonprofits throughout Detroit, were building trails with this grant money on their own. And so the Greenways Coalition came along to fill that vacuum and support that effort and provide that bigger vision. And then as Detroit went through bankruptcy, they were able to make great hires like Janet and take a much more of a leading role in greenways and trails in the city of Detroit.
Yeah, thanks everybody. So now I want to talk a little bit about your success. Most RAISE applications are not successful because the process is so competitive. My understanding is, well fewer than 10% of the applicants are successful in any given round. So both Detroit and Durham have beaten those odds and have secured such grants repeatedly, but not without setbacks. So what did collaboration on these grant applications look like? And what were key factors in your community's ultimate success? Anybody feel free to get us rolling.
Well, I'll go first and say that, you tout us as being successful, but we actually put in a lot of applications that weren't successful. And I think, but along the way, we learned how to make a better application and we learned how to collaborate more. Initially when this was seen as just as a fund that DPW, our Public Works Department, could apply for, and it didn't necessarily involve other areas or other departments within the city of Detroit. And when it came time to competing against other projects from other departments, we didn't realize that we didn't have the support at the in the mayor's office that we thought we'd had. And so for some reason, we didn't get our grant wasn't chosen by the city or wasn't pushed as hard as it could have been.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I would say the experience in Durham has been similar to Detroit. We've also submitted probably 8 to 10 grants through the Tiger Build Raise program over the last decade or so. And over that time, we have learned to really carefully look at the NOFO and try to identify projects that are going to score well, because it is a very arduous process to prepare these applications. So you need to make sure you have a good chance of success before you apply. And with our successful grant for the Durham Rail Trail, which has also been called the Durham Beltline Trail, we actually applied to 2 different grants. We received a planning grant in 2014, and that allowed us to prepare a master plan for our trail and sort of get it queued up for success for a construction RAISE grant, which we received in 2021. I think one of the keys for the planning grant being successful was initially meeting with our mayor and city manager, bringing together some stakeholders from different segments of the community to explain the process to them, discuss the project, and really to get their support as we headed into the application process.
Yeah, so great. Thanks. You both anticipated where I was going to go next, which is from success and the flip side of it being failure. And since each of you had failure before success, I want to scratch at that failure piece a little bit more deeply, right? It's very common for communities to have applied to Tiger Build Raise, if you will, multiple times before being successful. And as you said, Dale, Durham had that planning grant, but then was a third time's the charm in terms of getting a construction grant, right? So I want to hear more about what you've learned from those failures and how you use setbacks to beget future success. And so just, by one way of example, I know that USDOT does debriefs with unsuccessful applicants. And so that's one example you might speak to, what kind of information did you get and how did you use that the next time you came back?
Yeah, so with Durham's construction raise grant, which we were successful in 2021, we had actually applied in both 2018 and 2020 under the build program. And we did do a debrief with USDOT after the 2020 grant. And through that process, we found that, we had prepared a good application that scored well. And they did provide some good feedback on how we could improve our application. And I think when they do these debriefs, it's more of a verbal, like a 1 hour meeting. They really don't provide any written comments, which I can understand because they are dealing with such a large number of applications. But for us, it was very helpful to get some confirmation that we were on the right track, and also to get some hints on how to improve our application.
Right.
I will say that I think one of the challenges and opportunities in the process is to actually really understand and be able to clearly define what success is. It sounds self-evident, but I think a lot of people are like, well, we've got this really cool infrastructure idea and we want to build this. But, they're very interested in metrics and your ability to actually perform around those metrics. And so that requires some real thought about what are we actually trying to accomplish with this? Do we actually have all of the mechanisms, the partners, the alignment to make good on what we say we're going to accomplish? How are we going to measure what we're going to accomplish, right? And then can we demonstrate that there's actually the capacity for the feds to believe that you can execute and pull it off, right? All of those things, I think, are critical pieces. And it can take a couple of tries, because you might think you do. And then when you get actually into the application, you're like, oh man, that's maybe a little weak. And so I think that reiteration, as painful as it is, can help you hone some of that. Mm-hmm. And, hopefully with each application, your coalition building also gets stronger, right? Because mm-hmm. you are, reaching out to people, asking for support letters, asking, people to get behind it. I think it also really pays if you've, been able to actually show some demonstrated success. For us, in a weird way, the Tiger grant was really catalytic for the rest of the project, because getting that first piece done with the DeQuinder cut was this proof in the pudding that people didn't really believe maybe the rest of it could be done, or that it could be successful. And so having that was really foundational for building out the rest of the system.
And if I could add really quick to that too, one thing that we got included in that DeQuinder cut Tiger grant was eco counters. We had trail counters installed,
Mhm.
And I mean, we wanted it, our organization wanted it because we were funded by a foundation that was very interested in supporting access to fresh food. And this trail connected much of the city to Eastern Market where there was great fresh food. And the counters were installed in the winter and the trail was fenced off and it was icy and unplowed. And by the groundbreaking in the spring, it had already counted 25,000 trail users. And I was accused by the MDOT director of riding my bike in circles around the trail counter, which is totally not true. But it really cemented in so many people's minds that, wow, there's great demand for projects like this. And as Janet said, help us move forward to the next step.
Great. Anything to add from the Durham?
I don't think so. Not right now.
Okay. So let's pivot to talking about building political will. In some sense, this is at the core of what we wanted to really dig into today is how you, both built remarkable local political will to drive these projects forward. So let's start with Detroit. I'll start with Todd and then go to Janet. Because Todd, you've been at this longer in Detroit. And I know years ago, when Rays was built, the city of Detroit declined to prioritize a trail project you had for a grant. So what happened then, and how has that changed since?
Well, that gets back to what I said initially, how it was seen, tire grants were seen as just something within the Public Works Department. It didn't touch on planning. It didn't touch on all the other aspects of city government. And so the mayor wasn't all on board with this. Detroit has many priorities, and biking and walking trails weren't rising to the top. I think it took until folks like Janet came on board in the planning department and could prove that these trails were just much more than people walking and biking, which I know Janet can expound upon too. That really is what changed the support from the mayor's office.
Yeah, so Janet, out of everything the city's trying to do for its residents, I think it's incredibly remarkable. I learned from you too, that the Joe Louis Greenway is now the mayor's overall #2 priority after job creation. And so why is it a top priority? How do we come to this point for a city that has so many challenges?
Well, I think that the project really came to symbolize both literally and figuratively a lot of the things that the mayor was trying to accomplish, right? So this idea of one city for all was really an important platform at that time. And this was this notion of how could we have the city grow while putting the legacy residents first, and making sure that their quality of life was being lifted up, even as we were also looking at growth strategy. I think the other thing was that it was a neighborhood first strategy. So the downtown was beginning to have its own sort of, catalytic advances, and they were happening on its own. But Detroit's neighborhoods hadn't been invested literally for decades. And this was a project that connected Detroit's neighborhoods together. And it also provided choice for people. It connected people to those jobs, which were the #1 priority, in an affordable way that also addressed health equity issues and social justice issues, and quite frankly, environmental justice issues, all big things that were going on in the city and continue to be issues. And of course, I think too, then having the framework plan be so successful in actually catalyzing community capacity. I think it's fair to say that a lot of communities that have seen a lot of disinvestment over the years, trails are usually not at the top of their list. It's not like, oh yes, that's what we need. #1, I need a trail. So the really amazing way that the city went about doing the framework plan, introducing the project to, quite frankly, a lot of people who hadn't necessarily heard about it in advance, really build capacity. And so you had folks who were struggling with neighborhood block clubs. They were able to reinvigorate those. You had long-term organizations like Focus Hope that were able to pivot some of what they were doing and actually be more successful by marrying their efforts with the efforts of the trail. These kinds of things, they lead to good messages coming up, and mayors listen, and Mayor Duggan particularly keeps an ear to the community and listens to the community. And so I think all of those things really combined.
So, Dan, just a little follow-up there. It's interesting. I kind of hear in that a bit of a virtuous feedback loop between neighborhood level support and top level, city support. Do you see that as primarily a bottom up, a top down, or equal parts, both, kind of dynamic?
If there's anything my years of experience have taught me, it works best when it's both, right? It takes both leadership and it takes bottom up. None of this would have happened without Todd and his organization and the advocacy that they were doing. I remember an early meeting when I started at the city and meeting with Todd and him saying, hey, we've got these hopes, we've got these dreams, here's these things that we want to do. And so those things I think are also important. But it's really important that people see and understand the benefits that a project like this can bring to their community and how it can impact their quality of life. I think that if that does not happen, it is always a much more uphill battle to build the political support that you need.
Thank you. So let's pivot to Durham on political will. So the Durham Beltline has been a city-led project since it was identified in your Trail and Greenway plan more than 20 years ago. So what compelled the city to prioritize this project then, and then to continue doing so over time? What sustained it?
Well, the rail corridor that comprises the Durham Rail Trail hasn't been used as a rail corridor since the late 1980s, and it passes through a lot of neighborhoods that on the north and east side of our downtown, and over the last 20 years we've seen an amazing transformation in our downtown with a lot of redevelopment and new development occurring. And we have a successful rail trail on the south side of downtown that I mentioned before, the American Tobacco Trail. And so there was already a precedent, an example in our community that our residents were aware of and used. And they said, well, we've got this other trail. Let's do the same thing here. So I think there's been strong neighborhood support and political support really since the early 2000s, as you mentioned. I think getting that planning grant in 2014 through the Tiger program did help us to sort of flesh out our vision for what this trail could be and get a lot of people excited who may not have been aware of it. It also gave us an opportunity to build some support with some residents who may not have been involved or may not have seen the benefits of a trail prior to that time. I think also, as far as talking about building political support for the RAISE grant and for this type of project, we work very closely with our elected officials, both at the national and state level. Starting with our Representative David Price, we've given Representative Price and his staff tours of this facility. They provided strong support for us, letters of support, and we also work with our two senators for letters of support, and also with our other local elected officials at the state level, our senators and representatives in Raleigh. and also with our local elected officials. And we provided about 70 letters of support as part of our application. We worked very closely with, a large segment of different types of organizations, business organizations, neighborhood groups, and tried to make it easy for them, provided sample letters and templates for how they could provide those letters. But it really helped us, I think, build a strong package showing to USDOT that we did have strong support in our community for the project.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. So let me shift to Nia here. So given that history of support from the city and efforts to engage communities through this design and build phase of the project, what are current challenges to sustained management of the trail?
So I think the process of getting so many people excited about this project, as Dale has described, is it's momentum that we want to continue through the project, right? And one of the things that happens, so our trail, we're not fully designed yet, and doing that technical design in a dense downtown, we've got overpasses, we've got underpasses, takes some time. And so one of the challenges we're looking at and continuing to work through is sustaining the momentum and the interest of the community while we design things and get permits. So that's one level. And so we've had an engagement process that's been went on most of last year. We'll be revisiting folks probably again next year. And then long-term, we're looking at how do we get some of those organizations that wrote letters of support, maybe some of those businesses, maybe it's the local creek watershed association that maintains their own trails, getting those folks plugged into the future programming aspects, right? So that there are people bought in already to be a part of this trail's life, because we don't have an independent trail organization in Durham, right? It's for now, it's going to be the city and then the support of these partners. So making sure that those folks are still at the table as we move through and still excited and thinking about ways they can plug in as we design and in the afterlife when it's a built thing. So as we design, we're thinking about, what are we incorporating? Like, is there a place where there's a future rain garden that could come in? Is there a group that wants to walk? There's the Diamond Divas that come out and walk. So making sure that folks have the ability to plug in will be important as we continue along the life of the project. I don't know if that fully answered your question, but
yeah, all right, thanks. So let's shift now to talking some about equity. So both your communities face significant racial and socioeconomic equity challenges, and equitable mobility is a priority for the U.S. Department of Transportation in allocating RAISE grants. So how would you position your project as helpful in addressing equity? Whomever would like to jump in.
I can talk a little bit about the Durham's process.
Mm-hmm.
So Dale has mentioned that we did a master plan, and in that document, it does address, it really positioned us, like Dale said, it addressed some of the initial analysis that you need, right? Like showing, measuring that we have areas of persistent poverty that overlap this corridor, measuring that we have people with, homes that don't have access to cars, a lot of renters, people that need to get to the downtown to either work or get transportation to somewhere else. So we're able to document that, but also for Durham, look at how do we shift the conversation about this kind of project in the future became very important as well. And so that was a part of our narrative that we wanted to make sure that as we were moving through the design, we were coming back to reach folks who typically may not have the time or capacity to participate. So that was a big part of our story as well. And we did, of course, do the things like looking at who's getting hit by cars and how that's going to help. Looking at we're connecting people. If you're riding one bus route from North Durham, this could be your shortcut. If you need to take that bus to downtown, you can now cut over. So things like that, being able to incorporate that into our analysis, I think were really, really helpful. and understanding like literally the makeup of our community, that we have poverty and minority communities here overlapping in this corridor, that they don't have other trails, that they don't have other open space, that this can help reduce their accidents, that this can help them get to work. So all of those, starting to layer all that information, as well as making sure that these people can still be plugged in, was really big, continues to be really important.
Detroit.
Yeah, I would say that, I already mentioned the access to fresh food, which is really important in our successful application. And then in future applications, we really emphasize too the connection to transit. And we looked at where people were getting on and off the buses and where the trail intersected with major bus routes. And how could we improve the bus stops at those locations to kind of improve the connections between the non-motorized and the public transit. So part of our project included these super stops with, more bike parking and bus stops and so on. So that seemed like a good way to make this more than just a recreational asset, make it more of a transportation asset.
Yeah, so that's actually worth picking up on, just because of the nature of this program at USDOT. It's a multimodal program, and at different times they've emphasized to different degrees. They're really looking for projects that have elements of bicycling, walking, transit, and sometimes driving as well, right? But that they're looking for that intersection of the different ways of getting around as being something that can fall between the cracks in a normal project evaluation. And so they're looking to reward projects that think about that interface between the different ways of getting around. So I appreciate your commenting on the bus walk bike interface, because I do think that that's something unique to this program as well.
I will say too, I always feel the equity conversation, especially in the context of Detroit, has to be sort of right-sized, because, there are all of those things that, people think about often with this subject. They're all very present, and it isn't like it's only in some parts or not other parts. I mean, not that Detroit is uniform by any means, but, they're there, and they're often there in spades. So when we're talking about equity, I think one of the things similar to what I hear from Durham is that framework plan was really important, because you have to define even what equity means to the community you're working in, right? And it's only once you do that then you can actually say, okay, well, what are the equity metrics that this project can actually address? And how is it going to, not just lift all boats, but actually compensate for maybe some of the disinvestment, or maybe the environmental injustice issues that have been going on for decades. A lot of the Joe Louis goes through industrial in areas, often with really great functioning businesses, but often also areas with a lot of contamination, right? So how do those things intersect? What other efforts are being tied into the project? So this project became aligned with some of the efforts with the Gordie Howe International Bridge, and that connection that it was going to be able to make with walking and biking, and how some of the community benefit improvements we negotiated for that have become now part of the trail system. So all these things start to get interlocked together, and I think those are going to be very unique to the place.
Yeah. So one thing I hear coming through from a number of you is the importance of metrics, or at least that you each used metrics as part of how you made the case. Maybe say a little more about how data driven you saw it was your application, right? Like did you just say, well, for accountability on the tail end, we've got to have some metrics written in here, or did you load up your application with a lot of data to kind of lay out why it was particularly important for your community?
We did try to use data as much as we could.
Mhm.
One of the things that Nia mentioned was the safety benefits of the project, and we did do a pretty deep dive into the crash data, bicycle and pedestrian crashes in our study area, and we found that well over 50% of the crashes in that study area involved people of color, and so that was data that we were using to identify how having a safer bicycle pedestrian corridor in this area would benefit our residents. And one thing another aspect of this is that the project will provide a direct connection to our transit center, which provides not only local bus service, but regional and trailways service as well, and also connects directly to our Amtrak station. So, having those transportation connections was also something that we emphasized strongly in our application.
Yeah. So yeah, my next question has to do with community support. A number of you have mentioned it in your comments, and I even see some of the comments and questions coming in from the audience that touch upon the importance of listening to the community as part of how you get to what you end up asking for. So I guess I've heard that political support, such as endorsements at the local, state, and federal level, all matter. But on the community support end, we know that also can be critical to gaining that political support at all levels, as well as showing U.S. Department of Transportation that this important project. So I guess I'd like you to walk us through a little bit how you gained such community support and any advice you have for listeners who might not be as far along in that process as you are.
I would say one thing that actually, put our trail on the map to begin with was a brochure. And we continuously made more and more brochures, and brochures, if they're done professionally, they look like, oh, this trail is kind of happening, right? Even though it's just maybe a couple people publishing these brochures. And so that was really successful for us. And also realizing a lot of folks, the Joe Louis Greenway is, 27 miles. And for a lot of folks, it's hard to comprehend what that means from a bicycling and walking perspective. And so I think it was very helpful too to explain to people that you'll be able to get on the trail a mile from your house and go to the river or go to different locations and give them those landmarks. And people are like, wow, that would be great to be able to ride safely those long distances. And Detroit's also blessed with, we're the heart and soul of American Black bike culture. And we have 80 some bike clubs in Detroit. Nearly all are African-American led, and really wanted to involve them in this whole Tiger build grant process. And so, I created a form where the presidents of each club could sign up and show their support for the grant. And, we got 30 bike clubs one time. We had 32 bike club presidents the next time. And not only did it show USDOT that we had support from the community and the bike clubs, but it also made them stakeholders in this project. So when it happened, when they came to the grand opening, definitely they all played a role in making this happen. We were super appreciative of that.
Yeah, I guess I would say for Durham, we don't have 80 Black bicycle clubs in Durham, unfortunately. That would be so amazing. But I think this may have been like a case of trial by fire for us for a little bit on the city side. We had this amazing kind of history of the project having been in planning. And we had a lot of support from businesses and our local politicians. And we actually had residents kind of check us and say, hey, did you go back and talk to the least among us who don't pay attention to planning for the last 20 years? And it's kind of a community push to go back and recheck again. And I think it may have been a little painful, but it got the project back out there again in front of residents across a broad spectrum. And I think it was actually a really good move that led to the city kind of changing the way it even approaches community engagement kind of across the board. And so it was good for the project ultimately, and it was also good for the city. because it's totally changed the way they approach big project planning. So I think that was a win for us in terms of, not just this project, but for all of them.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. So what we're going to do is we're going to pivot to focusing on audience questions at this point. And we've had a lot come in, so it's going to be continue to be a rich conversation. And so do also invite the listeners to drop their questions in the Q&A box if they haven't already. So one here I find interesting is there's a listener who wants to kind of dig more into the way that DOT scores, and the implication here seems to be that since you've had multiple rounds and you had unsuccessful applications and debriefs with the department, that you might have an idea of, where did you may have scored strongly in the year, even when you didn't get the grant, and kind of what feedback did you get about just the scoring dynamics? How much does that play into going from being on the, oh, you didn't quite make it, side of things to getting over the hump? Was it a numbers game at some level?
Well, I'll say really quickly, I know one year, I think it was Janet and the team put together a really good application, and it was even highlighted on a USDOT blog post, which I thought was, right, we're going to get this money, right? But that year, the Big Tiger or Build grant in Michigan went to Flint and rebuilding roads and replacing lead pipelines, which of course that's going to trump a beautiful trail project. So, I mean, sometimes even if you score really well and have the perfect applications, there's going to be another community that has a higher need and is going to trump you.
Right, and one thing we learned in our debrief with USDOT was that in 2020, the application we submitted had scored well enough that it was recommended to the Secretary of Transportation's office for funding. But my understanding was that, they submit a large number of those applications that score well to the Secretary's office for consideration, but then the Secretary's office makes the final selection on which projects get funded. So I don't know, I don't have a lot of detail on sort of the nuts and bolts of their scoring process, but I think if you look at the notice of funding opportunity, it's very detailed about what they're looking for. And as you're preparing your application, just try to follow and hit the points that they're looking for in their NOFO.
Okay, so I'm going to see if our team behind the scenes can do a little wizardry here. So have quite a number of questions relating to rural context, and I guess let me just jump in there, because given the folks we've got here, we're probably not going to go deep into rural today, but we do want to acknowledge that this is a really important topic to us, and one that we may look into having a future webinar about it. But it is an interesting topic in the RAISE context, because DOT is supposed to split the grants between urban and rural, and often I wonder, like, where does that leave suburban? And I'm sure that they attach on to some of the others, but in any case, that's an expectation of the program, is that it splits pretty evenly between urban and rural. So that would be a great topic for another day, and would encourage the folks who are asking those questions to join us when we're able to give that our full attention another day. So I see another question here that relates to project delivery. As I understand it, there's something like a 4-year deadline on construction. I just maybe just speak from your own experience, how much you can say about pressures you felt on project delivery. Are there any challenges there people should be aware of?
I will say I'm in the middle of working on another raised project, and I mean, the time goes very quickly.
Mhm.
And you really have to have a plan to get yourself there, and don't underestimate how quickly that time is going to go. What you're going to need in terms of environmental clearances. One of the things that I find really interesting about raise grants, and I don't know how the feds will feel about me even saying this, but it's public knowledge, they have given some of them out as direct recipients. So they have gone around the state DOT process, which is unusual, I think. And that's something new that I have been experiencing. There can be pluses and minuses to that. Then all of a sudden, as a direct recipient, you take on all the responsibilities of the reporting. But there may be some advantages to it, depending. I think a lot of times it's just that the DOTs are so busy right now that they can't always take on the project.
Mhm.
But I think it's really important to understand the steps of the process, have a plan. Make sure you know who's going to run this, that you bring on, whatever teams you need to support you in that process in a timely manner, so that you can, really make sure you understand who's got to review, the documents every step of the way, to make sure you sort of cross the finish line, and that you've got your money under basically contract to meet those deadlines, and then you're able to also then meet those construction timelines. And it's not rocket science in one way, but I think it's very easy to feel like, oh, we've got some time here, and it goes really quick.
So any more on that? Or I can go to another. So a comment and then a question. So one comment from the audience had to do with it being very helpful to follow the directions and the request for proposals very carefully, right? And that if you want to give them exactly what they request, and to pay, to get a microscope there, reading through the request and answering all the things they raise. In other words, it's good if you can follow directions. You don't want me writing your application, because I'm not good at that. But that's good comment. Then there's a question about the number of people it takes to apply. Like work hours or number of full-time equivalents. What for a successful application, how much effort goes into it?
More than you think.
People want numbers.
Yeah, I think there's two things to keep in mind with any of these grant applications. One is that while you may still be allowed to be pretty loosey-goosey on exactly what your design is, you're not allowed to be that loosey-goosey on your cost estimates. And that is always the kicker, because all of a sudden you're faced with having to generate cost estimates that you don't actually really have everything figured out for, and you need a fair amount of detail to meet the cost estimate hurdle. So just really keep that in mind, that sure, the whole point is that you're maybe looking for the funding to take it to the next step, but you have to know enough about what you're doing that you can do a good cost estimate, and that cost estimate is going to be something you're going to have to live and die by later on, when you do figure out a bunch of things that you maybe didn't know when you did the application. So to the extent that you can do your homework in advance, I think that's good. I remember the other thing we struggled with a little bit when we were doing some of our applications in Detroit was just graphics. We hadn't created pretty pictures, because it was a lot of conceptual stuff. I mean, we knew what we wanted and alignments and maps, but all of a sudden you're like, yeah, everyone's like, well, do you have like one or two really beautiful shots? And it was like, oh yeah, we got to do some renderings. And again, depending on where you are in the process and what you've done, maybe you have those, maybe you don't, maybe you're not even sure obviously of all the details, and yet, it's nice to have a couple of key graphics. That's also going to help you with your capacity building, support building. People love to see a picture, right? Like, what are we talking about? But you also at the same time have to acknowledge that probably there's still a lot of design work and that nobody should, take this too seriously. But so I would say that those are two things that I remember when we were going through the application being like, oh, wow, we have a lot more work than we thought around those spaces. And we needed funding to do those things. So, do you have the funds set up to have a successful application?
Mhm.
Yeah, and I would say on the Durham side, with the successful applications that we've done, we recognize that we didn't have the resources in-house to prepare the narrative for USDOT, and so we had some consultant resources to help us with that. And we, there were probably a handful of city staff who were meeting 2 or 3 times a week with the consultant, preparing the application during at least the most intense period. I think city staff did take on the brunt of getting the letters of support and some of the resources on that end, but it was very helpful to have a consultant to help with, like you said, some of the graphics and others, and we had to pull in information from other folks, like preparing the benefit cost analysis. We had other departments helped us with pulling in the data that we needed for some aspects of the application process as well. So it is an intense process.
Thank you. So given the timing, I believe I'm about to ask the last audience question. And I will say to the audience that if we missed your question, we do make an effort to respond to those offline. So we might not get to everything during this live broadcast, but we do try to respond to what people submit. So this last live question then has to do with project phase and scoping. So they want to know whether DOT is interested in funding a specific phase of a project, even if future funding requests are anticipated once, say, the right of way is secured, or should the entire scope be submitted all at once?
I think all of the ones that I know about have been a phase, so I don't think you should shy away from that. They do not hesitate to give you less than what you've asked, right? Right. So you can ask for a lot, and then they may tell you, well, we can give you this. And then you have to very quickly be able to rescope and say, yes, we can do it for this, for that. That has definitely been something that I've experienced too. So just be prepared that they are under no obligation to just say yes or no to what you ask. They can come back with a third option, which is, well, you asked for 20, how about 15? What could you do?
Do you find yourself then scenario planning for those kinds of things, or do you just respond on the fly?
I
wish I could tell you that we scenario planned, but
yeah, I can say that I was in the meeting when the city was told they only were getting 10 million as opposed to 15 million for the trail. When DPW asked, well, that means we can scale back what we're doing, right? And USDOT says, no, that means you need to find $5 million more money. But fortunately, that was back in the day when construction costs could come in under budget, and we were saved by that.
And I can say I know of a more recent example where they were able to scale back the scope a little bit. They basically shortened it. They said, okay, well, it was a bigger system. We were going to go for X amount of miles. You're going to give us this much. Now we're only going to do this many miles. So it didn't change the scope of work per se, but the length of how much they were going to be able to accomplish.
Great. Well, thank you for those answers. So I want to pivot back to Isabel now to tell us about a really important event next week.
All right, thank you, Kevin. To close us out, we at RTC are thrilled to announce the launch of a new RTC initiative, the Trail Nation Collaborative, a learning community where advocates, public leaders, and professionals can come together to share their experiences, their challenges, and their strategies for accelerating the pace of connecting trails and active transportation infrastructure. We want you to be part of the launch of this community on January 9th from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern. This interactive event will inspire us to think deeply about what it takes to breathe life into trail networks, leading with equity and inclusion and unlocking their potential for people and places. 2-hour kickoff event will include 3 conversations featuring inspirational leaders from across the public and nonprofit sectors and encourage dialogue among participants. We hope you can join us. That's all the time we have today. I want to thank our presenters, Nia, Dale, Janet, and Todd, and want to thank you all for joining us.